welcome to the 10th edition of the Life Equation. Finally hit the big double digit milestone. It's been a crazy year, and this is going to be the last edition of the show in 2026. So, thank you all for listening in. It's been a wild ride. It's been such a unique experience starting another podcast. I've been talking with my family a lot about what it's been like starting a new show, why I started doing a more general talk show as opposed to something sports related. That's something I always did before I did this. And I believe you can find it in a couple of links. I'll link it to this episode of the show if you're watching this on YouTube or just listening on Spotify. But I was, before doing this, doing another podcast of mine known as The Prior Perspective, which was primarily just a sports talk show. And I was having a lot of fun with it. I just didn't really have the motivation to continue it. And that's why I started the Life Equation here in 25. And I think so far it's been a good year. We've only had really 3 months of the show, give or take. But since I started it way back in August, it's been incredible, even if it's gotten off to a slow start. That's how everybody is. I've just had fun really talking to a bunch of different people and getting to know a bunch of people that I don't really talk to a whole lot. And hopefully, that is something we can keep on doing in 26 because I do want to have the show continue. I do most definitely want to have a lot more people that I haven't had on before and get a bunch of people that are a little bit more professional, I guess you could say. And that's no slight to anybody I've had on the show. I've loved having my friends on, but I think having a wider guest pool and continuing to kind of get people from multiple different perspectives and everything is going to be really cool. And also, I really think that the style of the show can do a lot, can do with a lot of improving. I think that right now I'm open to having a lot more free flowing conversations. And that's why I think we're really trying this today. You might notice that on this edition of the show, I actually don't have a guest per se. It's mainly just, hey, kind of open house. We're doing this. We're letting it ride, kind of just talking. I have a few questions and a few main talking points here. Some things that I've had people ask me over Discord and on personal messages, and just some things that my family have come open and talked to me about. But yeah, I think that I've had a lot of fun with the show. Hopefully, all of you out there have had fun listening to it. That's the important thing after all. And I guess that is a good place to start, is for y'all and for everybody out there who's listening. I'd say y'all like I'm a Southern hick. I've been in South Carolina for too long already, apparently, but thank you all for bearing with me. Something I've said a whole lot. Anyways, one of the main questions I've gotten regarding the life equation is who is mainly the target audience or target demographic of the show? Now, this is one thing I've been asked by a few people who are a little bit closer to me, like, hey, who would you rather have on these kinds of shows? And what kinds of people would you want to have? I'm really just open to anybody being on the show, and I feel like that's a very general answer. But if anybody wants to listen to this, as you know, Olby pops in the chat here and just says hello. And for everybody who's listening to this on Spotify or on YouTube in the past, like you may have noticed in the video feed right beside me, I do stream these on Twitch, so I have a few people jumping in and out. And if anybody in the chat does have questions or wants to add on to the talk show today, please feel free. Good seeing you as always, Olby. I really do just like having a bunch of different people on, but primarily I think I wanted to try and relate and reach out to a lot more people who are my age. I have a lot of people tell me, you look way older than you actually are. And for reference, I'm 23 years old. That's why a lot of people are asking me, dude, like you're talking about all this philosophical stuff. Why aren't you talking about sports, or why aren't you talking about, I don't know, like what movies are popular, or about all these memes that are going around or something like that? And short and to the point, I just feel like that kind of stuff hasn't mattered to me as much. I still really enjoy sports at the very least, not as much as I used to. I'm at a point where I feel like it's taken a much larger role in my life. And this is actually something that I was talking about with people, once again, like family, close family, my parents, who've offered up a wide variety of comments regarding the show personally. But sports, I guess we can start there just as a kind of off point. I think there's something that I was really passionate about. That's hence why I started the prior perspective so long ago. And I think that while I still enjoy going out and while I still think they're a great way to interact with people and have a bit of a social connection, once you get to a point where you actually have a job and you're out here and you're doing things, and then you get home and, oh, I've got to clean up my house. And not even just that. Do I want to call my friends? Do I actually want to go out? Do I want to clean something up? Do I want to try and start a side hustle because I'm not really satisfied with just my job or just my work? I really feel like it's important that you really look to a broader perspective of life. And again, that's why I kind of started this show in a sense. I've got a couple of side hustles, and trying to balance them all can sometimes be very difficult. I feel like there's a lot of people here and who are listening to this right now that can relate to that, where I've heard of it as a psychological phenomenon. In fact, there's a wonderful woman who I would recommend y'all watching, whose name's escaping me at the moment, but she talks about this thing, and I heard this in a video once, but she talks about sort of a shiny object syndrome, kind of how it's so easy to see something and think, oh, wow, that looks really cool, like a hobby or something that you would really want to go and try to do, or a place you'd like to go to, or a language you'd like to learn. And then most people pick it up, maybe do it for a week, if that, and then they end up quitting. And it's really kind of the same dilemma that we have with New Year's and New Year's Eve with all the New Year's resolutions that pop up. But a lot of people, you know how it is. I think they have a whole weekend now. There's a commercial out there that pinned like January 18th or January 19th, or that weekend that generally pops up as Quitter's Day or Quitter's Weekend. It's very easy to just pop from one thing to the next, especially when you're my age, when even if you've started a job, you may not be immediately out the gate with it. You may not feel like, okay, I'm doing something really important. Like this is something that, yeah, I'm so gung ho on. And that's not to smite my job. Obviously, in today's day and age, if you have a job, I think that's an incredible thing. I think it's definitely worthwhile to at least get experience in some capacity. And, like just going past all of the philosophical hogwash, a job is a job. I think money is unfortunately one of the most important things that we have in the world for one reason or another. And everybody has their different takes on it, from economic strains to, I don't know, just like how much of it do you really need to have, or the precedence of money overall. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in it, especially when you start trying to plan a lot of that stuff out for yourself. Having a grip on your finances is one of the most important things you can do. And we've talked about it kind of sparingly on this show. I feel like that's one thing I could really do more with the life equation, and one thing that I would really like to do in the show's up and coming episodes in the new year. I would love to have somebody on here who's a little more financially adept, like maybe to have a finance major at the very least, or somebody who's a little more like economically adept than somebody in my situation who's just starting out. And when you're just starting out, money is still a really big deal because you don't have as much in the bank. You're probably just figuring out the stock market and everything like that. And you're still trying to jump from place to place, trying to figure out where's the best place to put your money and what's the best thing to actually do with your money. So it can definitely seem like a lot. I'm actually planning on reading a few books about that as well from a couple of popular economists. But money overall is important, and I think that's a reason why a lot of people do side hustles to begin with. It's not the reason why I want to keep doing this one. I want to keep doing this show because I've genuinely had a lot of fun with it. And I think that's one thing that people have to battle with between a side hustle. At least it's been one of the biggest struggles for me with creating these sort of minor tasks on the side, or with anybody who's ever taken up a big project. If you're somebody who ever has worked a 9 to 5 and then you've started to pick up something large on the side, whether you're doing a radio show or whether you're doing some charity work or whether you're trying to write a novel, make a game, all these side projects that in of themselves don't become your job until they become your job, so to speak. And I hope that makes sense. In in my opinion, it's just very difficult. Well, okay, let me start again with that because that was about to not make any sense. But that's the struggle of life, and that's what a lot of people really have to deal with just in modern day, in the States especially, because that's the whole theme with the States is you've got to have a job and you've got to do a lot of work, and it's a big part of life, of course. And I don't want to just be rambling about economics and jobs, but it's something to kind of draw it back to the point I was going at. It's something that affects to some capacity, or at the very least might affect whether or not you want to keep doing something. And to me, that feels detrimental. I feel like if anybody wants to do something with their life, one of the big things that should be driving you or driving a passion of yours is not the fact that it makes you money, but the fact is that you really enjoy doing it. Everybody says that one of the most crucial, important things that you can worry about in your life, or one thing that you should at least strive to get to is, hey, are you actually enjoying what you do? And if you're not enjoying what you do, well, then you have some degree of power to try and change that. At the very least, if you're somebody listening to this, I really hope that you do have that kind of power. I hope that you feel like you have that kind of power. And it's a big debate between everybody starting at different places and everybody having different advantages and disadvantages with themselves. I certainly have mine. I think I've gone on to express a few of them in this podcast, and I would like to think I've been decently open about that. But everybody has their own reasons and their own maybe even doubts about themselves when they're just starting out. Hey, like, could I do this? Could I not do this? Like, is this something that I really want to end up pursuing? I've talked a bit on the show about how I've always wanted to write a novel. Well, not always write a novel. It's something that popped up in my brain a few years ago. I feel like it was something that I was super passionate about, that I would like to say I am still passionate about. I really like the idea of getting messages out to a wider audience. I think that's why I love doing this show so much. Is not because it's making me money right now. It's not, in fact, if you're listening to this at this time, but it's just because I still get to interact with a lot of people that I used to talk to online, some people that I haven't seen in a while, and it gives me a platform to really sort of express myself for whatever it's worth. And maybe sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to just sit down and talk. This was more or less how I did my radio shows in college for the longest time, was I didn't really have any partners or co-hosts when I was doing shows. I would kind of just sit in a booth and I would talk about whatever was going on in the realm of sports because again, that was my main theme at the time when I was doing college shows. And I would really just hammer those points home, some things that I had on a spreadsheet for like an hour, and then I would go home. So I think that was another reason why I really wanted to branch out and make a more general talk show because sports in of themselves do come up a fair bit in talk shows, at least I feel like they do. Not just because, oh, hey, it's fun to talk about. Did you see the result of this game? Did you see this crazy play that happened? But also, it's just a big reflection of how some people have spent their lives. Hey, what do you think this person felt after they made this play? Or maybe even just the drama of some things about how it's affected pop culture. I remember being obsessed wholeheartedly with the longest time from the aftermath of the Khabib McGregor fight because a lot of my buddies back home from where I'm from, they were crazy UFC nuts. I really got into watching that stuff a little bit with them, at least in the watch parties. But the point of the matter is, like, that just had so many different layers of conversation to it. It really opened the door to meet a whole lot of new people, to talk to somebody that I hadn't talked to in a very long time, to get out, to socialize, to sort of have my own thing again with my friends, to just watch and bond over. And I really think that's something that really drew me to sports, that still draws me to sports. I think we're in a day and age where that is one of the great unifiers. And I talked about this with Remo in the last episode of the show. If you missed that, that will hopefully be up by the time this episode goes out. It should be out way before this episode comes out. But sports nowadays, especially, are just something that maybe even bring a lot of cultures together, bring a lot of people together. Obviously, soccer has, taken over the globe for years and years now between the World Cup and between the numerous leagues in Europe and now America that are taking over, especially with Lionel Messi, I believe it was, coming over to play for Miami's club in America. Sports have just been such an amazing unifier. And I hope to fit them into this show in some facet. Having a sports player on the show could be really cool too. I feel like that's another thing that draws me to it is when you watch sports for long enough and if you start paying less attention to certain games or certain plays, I feel like there's a lot of people that sort of I don't want to say become desensitized to the fact that players are on the field and there's a lot more to it than just, oh, hey, this person dropped this catch or this guy didn't score X amount of points. It's a matter of, hey, there's a lot actually going on behind the sidelines and behind the locker room doors. And there are so many different variables to it. I feel like having a lot of coaches or players actually on a show like this would be really valuable. That's probably one of my biggest regrets. I hate talking about regrets, but one of the bigger regrets that I had about doing sports podcasts in college was I never really had anybody like that. I went to a generally smaller school, so we didn't have as many, NIL level college athletes. If those of you who are listening and are familiar with the way college football and college athletics have shaped out in the States, we didn't have a whole lot of people like that. That being said, I totally could have reached out to Instagram or emailed somebody or said, hey, I think you're a really interesting person, or I think you have a lot of interesting perspectives on this. Do you want to come on to this show? And that's really the foundation for talking to somebody or getting a lot of different valuable viewpoints is you have to be not the instigator, but you have to reach out and you have to be the person to get that ball rolling. In fact, that's probably one of the best reasons, or excuse me, that's probably one of the best lessons I've gotten from a friend or family member within this last year is that if you want friends or if you want to interact again with somebody close to you, or maybe somebody who was close to you and you're not so close with anymore, you have to really reach out and you have to be the friend because initiative is one of the hardest things to actually take action on. It's one of the hardest things for you to do. But if you can do it, then there's a lot of possibility that lies beyond that. I mean, it sounds simple when you say it out loud, but there are a lot of people who never actually put their foot on the ground and get running to it. In fact, to sort of bring this back to a point I made earlier, one reason why I still haven't made much progress on this book that I'm talking about is because I just got so in my head about doing it. And I actually heard Modern Wisdom talk about this. They talked about it on the show in their own end of year episode. But he was talking about how there's no reason to not just send it. And sometimes you would be amazed what you can do when you have no other choice or when it seems like you have no other choice. So if you can find a way to A, motivate yourself to do it, and B, like give yourself a really serious reason to do it, then that is really going to be the most important thing when it comes to you actually figuring something out and you doing something. Like when I started radio, I didn't really have any idea what I was doing as far as checking the transmitters or how closely I had to monitor the clock to make sure I did call signs at the right time, things like that. But as you keep doing it, you really start to figure it out. And that's another important thing that I heard from that podcast was don't be afraid to do something because you're still learning. If you are afraid of starting something because, oh, well, I feel like I'm not ready for this yet, then you're never going to start doing it because the chances are you're never going to feel ready. And to tie this back into this novel point I was making, I didn't really start writing out a whole lot of drafts for individual chapters of it or whole sections of it just because I truly didn't feel like I knew everything. Like I didn't feel like, oh, how do I write a female character in this way to the point where she's not, I don't know, overly expressive or offensive to somebody who thinks that like a character could be too promiscuous. You got to be careful of that, especially nowadays. Or, oh, like how do I make this villain actually seem menacing? Or is this line of dialogue quite right? Or does this just sound awful? Things like that, not word for word, but things like that. Those are the kinds of obstacles that you really have to try and sort of swallow for the time being and just say, we will figure it out. And if there is failure to be had from getting over those obstacles, that's perfect because I think failure is one of the greatest teachers that we have in this world. And I think that's a lot of the reason why some people never try something like this. And I'm not to put myself on a pedestal because of course I can still talk way too much on the show. I've still said things that maybe didn't come across the way that I wanted them to, and I'm still trying to become a better podcaster, a better listener, a better communicator, a better host, all of those things. I think it's always going to be a learning process, and I think there are always going to be ways that I can improve the quality of the show, with my fancy studio backdrop here of just my apartment and nothing else. There are a lot of ways that I can try to improve this, and there are a lot of ways that I can really improve myself with my job, with my finances. It's all a learning process, and it's all a big stepping stone that I have to get over. And so that's a reason why I feel like I would always say one of my main target audiences were younger people, just because I realized that the irony of the show being called The Life Equation is that I really don't know a whole lot about everything that goes on. And it's not just in the States, but across life in all facets, from finances, like I said, to relationships, to this whole loneliness epidemic that I've brought up a few times, to like belief systems, to politics, to how that all ties back into you and what's your family like. How would you go about chasing your dreams? Is it healthy to do this? Is it sometimes better if you just go against what your family says? Things like that. There are a lot of variables that I still haven't even had to toy around with yet, and there are a lot of things that I still need to learn. But the point is, regardless of what I'm saying, regardless of how like this show is affecting me, if there are people listening into this podcast who take something, anything positive out of what I say, if it helps them to move their life forward in a positive direction, and if I can expand this show, not for my own sake, but for the sake of continuing to do that, for continuing to perhaps give some positive messaging to some people who might need it, or some motivation that's not necessarily easy to accept, but needed, I feel like that's the important thing. And that's really why I did start the life equation to begin with. Now, another thing I wanted to mention about just me starting something and starting this up with especially this platform right now. And I mentioned before, I have been streaming some of these episodes live on, funny enough, my Twitch channel, which is age old at this point. And I guess I can offer up a little bit of backstory on this to make a long story short for some people who might be just listening in now. I actually started streaming on Twitch back in like 2020. I was coming off of my senior year of track that just got canceled midway through because, there was this little thing called coronavirus that popped in and really stamped out my hopes of improving or helping my team or doing whatever it was that I felt like I could have. And it was just a sour time for a lot of people. And I was in the middle of the sticks. I didn't really have anywhere to go or do anything. I was kind of just cooped up in my house. And so when I dusted off some of my old game consoles that I hadn't really used in a while. And then I looked online and saw there were a bunch of people playing these games from my childhood, not just for the sake of playing them, but people that, hey, like these people aren't just like Discord mods. They talk, they like actually have some social interaction with people. They're from all over the world. This could be cool. Let me try and do this. And so I took that up for a hobby for quite a while. And I would like to think I got decent at what I was playing, and it was a lot of fun. I think that doing this has given me a new perspective on what some people are going through. Some people who might not necessarily have jobs right now, and a bunch of other people who are from backgrounds that are very different from mine, both politically, socially, and just throughout the world. Because as I've mentioned before, and as I've had on this podcast now, we've had a variety of people from across the world. Most of it's been Americans, but we had a variety of Europeans on the show. Like Sonic was from Europe, and then Genga, she's Norwegian. Remo is Finnish. Nightfly, who was on the show beforehand, he's from Denmark. So, as I said before, it was a cool experience. I think I'm at a point in my life where it's not something that I would ever want to turn into a full-time career. Not that I could. I really don't know if playing video games is something that anybody really wants to make a full-time career, unless you're somebody like Ninja or one of those big faces out there. But even then, I feel like we are in a point where our society and our culture has become so digitized that to an extent I want to try and stray away from that, especially in my line of work because I'm a software developer right now. And so spending all of my time on like 5 days of the week staring at a screen and then coming home and staring at a screen more, it just doesn't add up, and it really doesn't make for a great experience in my opinion. I think it's important to try and be healthy to some capacity. I think it's very important to try and get outside more, which is something that we've really strayed away from. That sounds like such a hippie thing to say, like, yeah, go outside and touch grass. Yeah, I some people say a lot of different things about that. But I think that I do just genuinely want to prioritize different things in my life. I think that it was fun, and I think I had a very positive experience from it. I understand why people look at the hobby in some capacity and say, why does anybody do this? I think I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it though. I think I've heard enough people on this show talk about it, and from my own personal experience, it's definitely not as okay, well, who am I kidding? Yeah, it's a nerdy hobby in sense. But it does still teach you a lot of things. At least I feel like it taught me a lot of things about motivation and sticking to a goal. And I feel like for some people who are doing it and may not have a job, may not necessarily be in the best point in their life, having those kinds of values like brought up to you one way or the other can be really valuable. Now, obviously, do you need speed running to do that? No, because hopefully that's what somebody's parents are for. Hopefully you can also get that from running a marathon or training for a marathon, which I also did this year. Well, half marathon, but it was a cool experience nonetheless. Training for that really sets your mind straight. It really gets you to working towards a goal and staying in a consistent routine. I feel like that's one of the most important things that anybody can have going forward. And it's something that I would recommend to anybody my age. Having a routine and using a routine and making time to enjoy my side hustle is one of the best things you can do. Just setting aside this time every single Sunday where I can just pop open my computer and not just like look at a game for the entire time, but just genuinely talk to people and kind of express myself, I feel like is a really good it's a really good platform to do it, and I it's a big reason why I love doing this. It just gives me an excuse to work towards something, to have something to do. Like, hey, do I want to edit these audio files? I want to make sure this sounds as clean as it possibly can, and I want to make sure that I'm talking in a way that's at least understandable. Maybe sometimes it's not always great with what I'm talking about, but I still enjoy really branching out and talking to people in this capacity. Now, as far as me actually streaming going forward, I'm not sure it's something I want to take up. And again, if you've been around like me for a while online, then I've probably said this about 1,000 times, but I just don't want to lose the connections I've had online. Once your face is on the internet, it's kind of there forever. So there's really no point in trying to burn a bridge in that sense. Even then, I've never wanted to do that. I've never wanted to just say, "Hey, can I leave behind all of these people that I've met?" Because that's stupid. Like, why would you ever do that? Why would you ever just want to burn a bridge with some people who you felt like have added a lot of value to your life and people who have really shown you a lot of new perspectives on things? So I would never want to do that. I just don't know if playing games for like 3+ hours every Sunday is the best use of my life when I feel like there are other goals that I could be pushing myself towards, especially, as you get older. A lot of my friends and myself included, we've all talked, and I think myself included, I want to have kids at some point. If my kids are playing video games, I'm not going to scream at them. I'm not going to do anything because they can have fun. I would hope that they have a similar experience playing them when I did as a kid if they chose to go that route. Or I also hope that even if they don't find fun with that they have an opportunity to just get outside and really think for themselves, be independent, and do what they need to. And that's a long time off. I feel like the whole debate on having kids nowadays or why aren't people having kids rather, that's an entire another conversation. That's one that I would really love to take up with some other people who maybe are fathers and who are mothers. I've had 3 women on the show as of this point in the end of 2025, and I think all 3 of them gave very well, okay, I guess Ganga, we didn't talk about that too much, but at least with Sarah and Ashley, who I talked to previously in those episodes, if you watched those, they both gave very different perspectives on those points because 2 of them are from very different walks of life, very different perspectives. And I just think that family is such an important part of life, and talking about why it seems like there are so many hurdles to getting to that point for us nowadays when maybe a while ago it didn't seem like those same obstacles existed. That's one thing I love talking about with people my age as well as people who are more experienced than I am. And if I can relay those messages and give some encouragement to people who also want to start families and maybe have seen some difficulties with trying that out or even just approaching possible partners, I think that's really valuable. And I think it's something that I could do a lot with as well, couldn't we all? So, something to keep in mind for the future as well. That's the one thing about doing these shows yourself is that ah, when you're just the one talking for like an hour's worth of time, sometimes your voice can get very worn out very quickly. So, if I pause for a brief moment, I may be taking sips of water in between. So, pardon me there. when I was doing one of my first ever radio shows, I had that luxury where I could just click a button and turn my mic off, and then I could just take a swig of water and immediately go back to the show like in a minute or like 30 seconds. It's like still pretty easy to do here, but when your face is on a camera, it's a little bit different if you're watching this online. So it's something different to talk about for sure. It's a different setting, but this is why I like doing it as well. Gets you used to brand new things, and we press on, we figure it out. The next question that I wanted to really address on the show here, and one that I got from some personal family of mine, is why don't you talk about happier topics? Like, why is every topic on your show something so deep and involved about, hey, like, what do you think your family should be like? Or what do you think gender role differences are? What happens when we die? I don't think I've asked that question explicitly on this show thus far. Or why don't you just have more fun with it? Is one that I've oddly gotten from family as well. And to kind of wrap that all up in one little bow, I think I sort of half addressed this earlier in the show, but these things are important. I feel like we live in an age where finding that sort of content isn't hard. If you really want to look up some philosophy or some theory about the Big Bang or religion or what happens when we die or all of that philosophical stuff, it's not hard to look up on YouTube and find that. The the important thing though is this: it's not that you can't find the information, it's that how do people really feel about issues like this? And if they are comfortable talking about it, I'm genuinely interested. Hey, what's your take on that? Especially somebody who is from a different background to me. And I just think that it's good to ask about if you have somebody who's comfortable about it, which again, that's why I'm thankful to have had so many close people that I know on the show who've actually been open to that. I feel like I've had great guests who, at the very least, have just been open to talking about certain issues, even if they haven't done something like this before in a podcast setting. I've really enjoyed just every episode I've done of the show so far this year. And I think that in of itself is one of the most valuable things that I can take from the show is just I've learned a lot from some people, and I hope that everybody who's been on the show, who everybody who will hopefully continue to be on the show in 2026 when we keep this rolling, I hope that you continue to learn a lot, and I hope that we continue to just have a lot more great talks because it's been great talking to people. But to get back to the real point here, I just think that rather than make the main topic of the show something about sports or something about, I don't know, like one random comic you read as a kid or something like that, I want to talk about something that hasn't always been addressed, but is still important to a lot of people. And if that means making people uncomfortable, then of course, if somebody's on here and we end up talking about something that they're not super familiar with, then that's something that I don't really feel like is warranted. But that's why you ask about you, and yeah, that's the thing with podcasts is like obviously you check all this stuff out with your guests beforehand. Is you make sure that hey, like, do you want to talk about this general discussion topic? And then if the conversation goes somewhere else, then it goes somewhere else. That's one thing I've really wanted to try and improve with the show is not necessarily limiting the show to one particular topic. I think it's important to have a basis for where the conversation should go, which has been the entire point of like the questions of the day and the overall topic of the episode. But I really want to try and have a lot more conversations be free flowing. I think that one of the most important things you can do that's more enjoyable for people to listen to, anyways, is does it sound like somebody's being interviewed or does it sound like we're kind of just here having a conversation? And if it's the former, can people really relate to that? That's one thing that I haven't liked about some podcasts that I've heard is that I feel like that a lot of people who've done some podcasts try to make it more like an interview. And it's very easy for it to get into that format when you're not face to face. That's one thing that I've wanted to also improve going into the future is that I want to have a lot more episodes, probably all of my episodes, if I can going forward, that are not just me talking between a two-way channel and a mic, but I also like to see people face to face, have an actual level of social communication, or if you have somebody in the same room, that's incredible, and that's what everybody does, and they do it for a reason, because having that, like, barrier be broken down between the social connection and being able to actually respond in what feels like real time instead of having to guess when somebody's done talking. Not that I've had to guess because, you have pauses when you're not looking at somebody in the face over the podcast, but I feel like anybody listening in, you get what I mean, is that there's a huge difference between talking with your parents over the phone and actually having them there in person, or a friend you haven't seen in a while, and then you have them on FaceTime as opposed to just like having them face to face. Even, okay, even with the FaceTime example, what would you rather have? Would you rather be calling somebody on FaceTime, or would you rather them be right there? And most of the time, I would like to say at least that I just love having people right here. I love having the actual communication medium not be abstracted by social media or by a call or by some other form of that. And so, one thing I really do want to get into the podcast in 2026, at least in some capacity, is I want to start having people here with me while I'm doing the show. I feel like that makes the conversation a lot more free flowing, it makes it more open, and it really just allows for me to be more genuine instead of having to pre-plan so many questions, which I'll still have to do if I want to keep somebody on topic, if I want to keep us around the general idea of the show. But back to what I was saying about the conversation being more open and free flowing. When you're actually there with somebody, it's not even close. You sort of have to, in some capacity, get used to talking to somebody and going off of somebody and really just making it a conversation and not an interview. I feel like that's one thing I haven't had the opportunity to do so much, just because this has always been the medium where I have done my shows. Is not that I'm complaining that I have people here in the chat room or that I have some other people on social media who have talked to me, but I think the only time I've ever had an in-person partner for a show was my senior year of school, where I was still doing one of my sports podcasts, and I had a friend of mine. We popped in for an episode or two, and we talked basketball for a good while. And honestly, they were some of my favorite episodes that I ever did, unsurprisingly, right? It's amazing. When you have somebody actually in the room, it feels a lot more connected. You feel a lot more into it. It feels great. And so I really want to have that going forward. I'm not necessarily sure if I can have a group of people or if I can have that kind of environment on this show, but having a bunch of, at the very least, having one in-person guest per show and having that medium back and forth, that actual communication channel, that face-to-face communication, is really important. And it's ironic that I'm talking about this here when I'm posting this to an online forum like Spotify or YouTube. But I really do think I want to go back to that point, is that human interaction and encouraging people to talk more about actual human interaction, what's important, as opposed to doom scrolling for hours. I feel like that's what I really want to get to the heart of. And that's why, to sort of drag this back to what I was talking about beforehand, that's why I really do talk about some things that might on the surface seem a bit more sad. It's not that I always want to be sad, because who wants to be sad? Nobody wants to sit around and be all scruff McGruff and life sucks, because what? Like, how are you going to live a positive and like good life if all you're doing is complaining about it? And to some, I understand that it's a lot easier for some people to do that than others. I've heard people say that, like, depression is a state of mind. Maybe to some extent it is. I think there's a lot of validity in the claim that, like, being sad is a choice. The problem is there are still a lot of variables in somebody's environment that make that decision very easy or very difficult. I'm in a position where I can thankfully say that I feel like me being happier to an extent is very easy. But even then, you what's the problem about being in a situation where it's easier to be happy is that you don't feel the need to necessarily push yourself. You don't feel the need to always pursue that side hustle or write that book or go to that event because, oh, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm still here in my beautiful apartment complex. I've got so and so, I've got friends. If you're comfortable enough, you can almost justify sitting around and drinking beer until you die. And that sounds depressing in of itself, right? That sounds really depressing in of itself. But to an extent, it's true. And it's not that I want to bum everybody out with the discussion topics of the podcast, because I love just going back and forth and I love laughing with people and I love just mentioning something absurd. Like, Not that I want to choose favorites of my guests, but one of my favorite episodes that I've had on the show so far, two of them I'll say, in fact, I actually thought about this beforehand, but were Genga and Nightfly, those two episodes when I had them on. Not because I value anybody that I've had on the show over anybody else. They've all been great, but those were the two episodes where I really felt like the conversation was just moving to a point of, okay, I'm no longer just asking questions. We're kind of just shooting it back and forth about everything under the sun. And that's great. I feel like that's really open. That's positive. That's something that should happen, and the topics can really go just about anywhere. I feel like that really makes for a healthy discussion, a healthy podcast, and it's great to talk about those kinds of things. So that being said, why would I talk about more deep concepts, or why would I still try to pull people from, my age group who maybe haven't had to deal with this stuff so much and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Is just because I feel like we live in an age where to some extent it's undermined, and not that it should be all that we talk about, right? If you go out to a restaurant with your friends and the first thing you ask about is what is the meaning of life, everybody's going to look at you like you're a complete kook. And no wonder, because that's not really just something you openly talk about. And that's why that's why obviously whenever you do this, you have to get the discussion topics out of the way beforehand. Like, hey, would you be interested in talking about this? And so and so. You don't bring somebody onto a religious podcast without telling them they're going to be talking about religion, if you know what I mean. So that goes without saying. And I feel like it's just very important to still address some bigger issues because we don't always focus on that when it's so easy to get away from them with distractions we have nowadays and with TVs you can turn on and games you can play and all of these things that may be around us. And like I said, it's different. It's difficult for some people to pick those things up, some people to put those things down, or it's difficult for some people to be more positive about one issue or be more negative about another. I just think that when you get down to it, life is definitely worth living. And it's a shame when you look around and you see some people that are in a situation that makes believing that extraordinarily difficult. I think I've talked to a few people both on this podcast and off of this podcast who would say that sometimes have been really hard. I think another one of the main reasons I should say why I started the show was because I was just really miserable in the fact that even though I have a great life, all things considered, I'm in a much better spot than many people nowadays are. I have a job, I have an apartment, I'm stable, I have a good life. I It's very easy to get into your head and still look at all the things that you may not have, or it's very easy for you to set a goal for yourself or an ideal life for yourself, point to that, and then look back upon yourself and reflect on how like I'm not there, I wish that I could be doing more. I wish that I was doing this. I wish this show had so and so viewers. I wish that and you can go on and on and on and on, and you can like make the cage thicker and thicker and make it even harder to escape. Or in some capacity you can find a way to look at the great things. And that's what I've been trying to do, and it's difficult. It's definitely not always easy to get up in the morning, especially when it can be like if you get up in the morning and it's 20 degrees and it's gray and it's rainy and you really don't like your job and your boss is like verbally abusive to some degree, then yeah, obviously finding any positivity in that is going to be really difficult. There are kids who don't have legs. There are kids who get up in the morning and like have abusive parents. And they probably think that life freaking sucks and justifiably so because that's a really terrible situation. It's regrettable when you look at places like that, and it's regrettable that I'm really digging into the hole now of like negativity, but it's the point I'm trying to make here is that yeah, like sometimes it's really hard to see the light of day when it seems like some things just really suck. And especially if you dig yourself a philosophical hole, which is what I've done, is like, hey, what was I doing here? When you don't have a whole lot of friends in a brand new place, it can be really easy to do that. And when you feel like you're far away from family, there's a lot of different factors to it. And that's why I'm also really glad that I've had people like that who have come onto the show, who have kind of expressed their feelings in that regard, but who also can still just be happy. And that's another thing I really would like to see from people that I bring onto the show or people that do watch the show. Like I said before, I just hope that this is able to give people who might need some kind of encouragement, some form of encouragement about, hey, we're all in the same boat. Life some days can just really, really suck. Some days your job might not be great. Some days you might just feel completely alone. Some days it might just feel really rough. And so, even though I get it, like a lot of the topics I've had aren't like, hey, like, what did you think of the sports game, man? And some lighthearted stuff like that. If it was something that I feel like was like something I was super passionate about, I feel like it's all I would talk about. And the reason why I'm so seemingly like positive and gung ho about negative stuff is not because I'm depressed. It's not because I really do want to bring everybody down, but it's because I want to sort of bring these issues to light. And even when we're in this kind of society where information is everywhere and it seems like there's a surplus of it, it doesn't seem like we have so many people who are open to the subject of, hey, like, let's acknowledge this issue. Let's find out what's actually wrong with it, or why you might be feeling this way, or why so many people feel this way, or why this social aspect is like this, or why this politician sucks, or something like that. That's a crude example I brought up. But that's really just why I end up talking about deeper things and things beyond like sports and games. And I of course encourage everybody to have a balance. I think it's very important to not just destroy yourself with, oh, I'm not doing as much for this hobby as I really should be doing. And if all you end up doing is looking at the negative aspects of yourself and like, oh, well, I'm not doing this, I haven't reached this goal. If you always beat yourself up, you're never going to go anywhere because having a negative mindset is going to drag you down harder than anything. How you end up breaking out of that mindset is a different challenge, and one that I would love to continue to talk about as this show goes on and as I continue to bring more people onto this show. I can't really describe how in a lot of aspects I've broken out of that mindset on some days rather than others. It's obviously like very difficult on some days, like I mentioned, to actually just be positive. At least that's how I feel sometimes. Some days it really is just hard to kind of be happy, especially when you're alone, especially when you don't have a whole lot of friends around you, and when maybe your online community, if you have one, isn't always like readily available, or you don't even see a lot of people in person. But I just want the show to be here to express that, yeah, listen, as somebody who's just now going through life, as somebody who's seeing a lot of the social struggles and personal struggles that some people my age might be going through, I'm trying to get it at the very least. And I hope that I can help you get it to a better facet, even if I'm not God. And even if I don't understand everything myself, even if I don't have all the answers for myself, I hope that we can talk it out. I hope that we can come to an understanding, even if we have different perspectives on things. And I hope that I can just help you to have a more fulfilling life, even if that means talking about some things that are difficult to talk about sometimes. That's what I'm doing this for. So that's what I have on that. All right, and then I guess the last major question I had here, and there's one. Okay, you know what? I will answer this real quick. So I had somebody ask me this in my Discord before we started the show today, because I was asking around, like, hey, is there anything that you guys would want to hear answered on the show? And this actually comes from Sarah, who I had on a few episodes ago. Do you have a favorite movie or a comfort movie? And see, now we are talking about positive things. Just gonna fit this in real quick before we get to the last main question of the show. Um, to make this answer like relatively short, this is gonna sound like a bit of a weird answer for a comfort movie, but I think I would always say Prince of Egypt. That might actually just be my favorite movie ever, animated or otherwise. Maybe that's not true nowadays because I've seen a lot of movies that I'm really a fan of. I just saw, okay, I shouldn't say Saving Private Ryan because that's a really hard watch, but that's a great movie. I saw Inglorious Bastards like about a year ago. That's a great movie in of itself. But Prince of Egypt is just one that I watched when I was really young, and I remember after I saw it, I just like showed it to everybody in my family. I just loved everything, like the music, the message of it, and not to be explicitly Christian about it, but it's a great movie. Like I've heard of atheists who love the movie even still. So it's a great one. I will always go back to that movie if I feel like, I just want to watch something that I know will kind of make me happy in one way or the other. And it's again, it sounds weird to say that's like my comfort movie because there's still some messed up things that happened in Prince of Egypt. It's the story of Exodus. I'm sure everybody knows the movie itself, but there's still scenes in that where like Moses is running around the tomb, for instance, or like the giant Sphinx. and he sees the hieroglyphs of like all the babies getting thrown into the river with the alligators, and then there's the plagues and everything like that. Maybe it's like there are better options for a comfort movie, but the ending is still like a really cool message, and there's still a lot of happy moments in between that. So I would probably answer that as like my favorite movie or favorite comfort movie. And then to kind of close things out here, what is the overall plan for the show in 2026? I've kind of addressed this throughout the show. I really want to have a lot more in-person episodes. The show might go on a bit of a temporary hiatus until like hopefully no later than mid to late January. For those of you who are listening in, I just had somebody in the chat say somebody funny. It's just a you guys are seeing that there. That's a reference to a friend we had who's roaming around the internet nowadays. But anyways, the plan for the show in 2026, I really want to have a lot more in-person episodes. There are a lot of people who I've met in my local community who I really would love to have on the show. People that are not only like older than me and have experience like I talk about, but even still, I've met a lot of people my age in talk circles and local events that, for one reason or another, I feel like would be very valuable to have on this show. I've mentioned this briefly in past episodes, but I've actually been a part of a young men's discussion group for the better part of 2 months now. I think probably even longer than that. And I've just met a lot of guys in there who, for the time being, will go unnamed for privacy reasons, but shout outs to that group. They're great guys. They've really helped me out in figuring myself out and just being less alone in Charleston as I've moved down here and been so far away from home. So thanks. But there are a lot of guys in there who I would love to have on the show. A lot of people just around that I feel like are really worth talking to. I mentioned as well, but there is a I don't want to say renowned, but like there's a pastor from one of the like churches down here, church in South Carolina. I know, unbelievable, right? But he's a guy of his own, and he's done a few podcast episodes, and he's been more open to talking with people. I would love to have him on the show. He agreed to come onto it. He was supposed to come onto it a few episodes ago, but he's had some personal stuff in his life, and he's been dealing with that. So all due respect where it's worth, I don't want to rush anything there. But hopefully that episode will be around in sometime in the near future in 2026. I can't guarantee it will be the first episode, and I don't know where it's going to be, what it's going to look like, but stay tuned for that. I will definitely make a post on the social media platforms when that comes out. And then besides that, yeah, like I said, I really just want to try and reach a wider variety of guests. I think in 2026, I really want to start reaching out to a wide variety of people outside of my local community, outside of my local friend group, outside of online forums. And again, that's no disrespect to anybody that I've had on the show. Everybody who's been on the show so far, you have helped me get started, and talking to you and just learning more about you, about what you think about a personal issue or about something that's happened or about a social issue. You have been a big reason why this show has gotten to the point where it's at. You're a big reason why I want to keep doing it, and you've made this a lot of fun. So, thank you in that respect. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope that we can have more great discussions in the future. And yeah, so that about wraps it up for, I guess, what we will call the 2026 recap. Again, this is the 10th episode of the Life Equation. We hit the big double digit number, and hopefully there are far more to come. Hopefully we can reach the big triple digit number in the near future. Who knows how long that will take. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening into the show, and I really appreciate you all being here. Hopefully some more great episodes to come in the future, some more great people, and hopefully you guys end up sticking around as we keep improving and keep asking questions. But yeah, thank you all for listening to Life Equation, and until next time, peace out, everyone.